The Christmas Eve Invasion. Professor Zaxari's bioluminescent spots pulsed with anxiety as he reviewed the security footage for the 1000th time. The Zaxari warships had appeared without warning on December 24, 2157, their quantum signatures completely masked until the moment they breached Earth's atmosphere. It should have been impossible. The primitive defense systems of the Sol system shouldn't have lasted more than minutes against such advanced technology. Yet here he sat, 3 cycles later, watching humanity's inexplicable survival play out on his holoscreen. "Computer, enhance Sector 7 Alpha," he commanded, his secondary nervous system still twitching at the memory. The footage zoomed in on a particular human settlement, Seattle, according to the archives, where the first signs of resistance had emerged. The recording showed a young woman, later identified as Nova Chen, racing through the chaos of the initial attack. While others fled, she ran toward the nearest crashed Zaxari scout ship, her experience with virtual reality combat simulators evident in every movement. The way she adapted to the alien technology, hijacking the scout ship's neural interface as if she'd trained for it her entire life, had caught the attention of the Galactic Council. But she wasn't alone. In New York, Mason Drake had demonstrated an equally impossible understanding of quantum shielding principles, using the city's power grid to create a makeshift defense barrier that shouldn't have worked, yet somehow did. And in London, Rex Thompson had turned the city's gaming servers into a distributed computation network that predicted Zaxari attack patterns with shocking accuracy. Zaxari's facial membranes fluttered in what his human students would later recognize as a smile. He still remembered the day the Galactic Council had summoned him to explain these anomalies. Impossible. High Counselor Vectra's crystalline form vibrated with indignation. No pre-contact species has ever survived a Zaxari invasion, let alone repelled one. These humans must have had help. Zaxari stood before the council, his reputation as the galaxy's foremost expert on emerging civilizations on the line. The evidence suggests otherwise, honored ones. What we witnessed appears to be the result of something uniquely human, their entertainment technology. The council chamber erupted in confused murmurs. Zaxari continued, his spots pulsing with academic excitement. Humans have developed sophisticated simulation systems they call video games. While intended for recreation, these programs have inadvertently prepared their entire species for complex problem-solving under pressure. Their younger generation, in particular, has spent thousands of hours practicing skills that proved unexpectedly transferable to real combat situations. Preposterous, Vectra scoffed. You expect us to believe their children's playthings defeated the Zaxari? Not exactly, Zaxari replied, calling up his analysis. But consider, their games frequently involve managing resource systems, coordinating team tactics, and adapting to changing rule sets. The average human gamer has more experience dealing with unusual scenarios than many of our trained military specialists. The council fell silent as data streamed across their consciousness. Statistics, battle footage, and behavioral analyses painted an unexpected picture. Humans hadn't just gotten lucky, they had been unknowingly preparing for this moment their entire lives. There's more, Zaxari continued. The 3 individuals I mentioned, Chen, Drake, and Thompson, they represent something unprecedented. Each independently developed solutions that should have required advanced knowledge of galactic technology. Yet they claim they simply applied principles from various games they had played. High Counselor Vectra's crystalline surface rippled thoughtfully. And what do you propose we do with this information, Professor? Zaxari's spots brightened with determination. I request permission to accept these 3 humans into the Galactic Defense Academy's advanced program. The chamber erupted again, this time in obvious protest. The Academy hadn't accepted new species in over 300 cycles, let alone individuals from a pre-contact civilization. The program's rigorous requirements had been designed to be nearly impossible even for advanced races. Order. Vectra's harmonic voice cut through the chaos. Professor Zaxari, you understand what you're suggesting? These humans would need to complete training that takes our best candidates a minimum of 7 cycles. The physical and mental demands alone. With respect, honored ones, Zaxari interrupted, committing yet another cultural taboo. I believe we need to consider the possibility that our traditional metrics for measuring potential may be incomplete. These humans have already demonstrated capabilities we thought impossible. Perhaps it's time we re-evaluated our understanding of what constitutes advanced problem-solving. The council chambers fell silent again, but this time with a different quality, something approaching curiosity. Vectra's crystalline form shimmered with what might have been amusement. Very well, Professor. You may proceed with your experiment. But be warned, if these humans fail, it will be your career that bears the consequence. Zaxari paused the recording, his spots dimming slightly at the memory. He hadn't known then just how prophetic those words would prove to be, though not in the way anyone had expected. The door chime interrupted his reminiscence. Enter, he called out, already knowing who it would be. Nova Chen stepped into his office, her dark eyes showing the same intensity they had during the invasion. Behind her, Mason Drake's tall frame filled the doorway, his red hair still catching the light like captured fire. Rex Thompson brought up the rear, wearing that insufferable grin that had become his trademark. Professor, Nova said, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had become her hallmark, we've completed the preliminary quantum physics assessment. Zaxari's spots flickered with anticipation. And we broke it, Rex announced cheerfully, dropping into one of the office's ergonomic chairs designed specifically to be uncomfortable for human physiology. He didn't seem to notice. Turns out the 15-dimensional calculations are pretty similar to the resource management system in Stellar Conquest 4. Who knew? Mason pulled up the results on his datapad. We also found 3 errors in the standard theoretical framework. The traditional approach doesn't account for quantum entanglement at the macro level, which is why previous solutions required so much processing power. Zaxari stared at the data streaming across his screen, his primary nervous system nearly shutting down from shock. They had completed the basic theoretical framework in just under 3 weeks. The previous record was 2 years. How, he managed to ask, his translator struggling to convey the complexity of emotions in his voice. Nova smiled, that same smile he'd seen in the invasion footage. Simple, Professor. We didn't try to learn it the way you've been teaching it. We treated it like a game. And that, Zaxari realized with a mixture of horror and admiration, was just the beginning. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would the Academy. The Academy's trials. The Galactic Defense Academy's central spire pierced the perpetual violet clouds of Centaur Prime, its crystalline structure refracting the light of twin suns into countless rainbow patterns. For most species, the sight inspired awe. For Nova Chen, it reminded her of the final boss arena in Stellar Crusade 7. You're thinking about video games again, aren't you? Mason Drake asked, his red hair now streaked with silver from their quantum physics practical exam. The dimensional exposure had strange effects on human physiology, something their alien instructors were still trying to understand. Nova grinned, adjusting the gravity compensators on her training suit. The architecture's practically identical. Even the energy patterns in the shield matrix matched the game's power-up system. Speaking of games, Rex Thompson called from behind them, his fingers dancing across a holographic interface. Has anyone noticed that the Academy's security protocols follow the same patterns as MMO raid mechanics? The 3 humans shared a knowing look. 2 months into their training, they discovered that many of the galaxy's advanced systems were surprisingly similar to game mechanics they'd grown up with. It wasn't convergent evolution, it was something far more interesting. In his observatory office, Professor Zaxari reviewed the latest training data with his colleague, Dr. Kvorth, a crystalline entity specialized in xenopsychology. It's not just pattern recognition, Kvorth's harmonics vibrated with excitement. The humans are actually restructuring our systems to work more efficiently. Look at these combat simulation scores. The holographic display showed 3 distinct patterns. The traditional training method, developed over thousands of years, produced a linear progression in skill development. The modified human approach, however, showed exponential growth curves. They're treating everything like what they call speed runs, Zalax explained, his spots pulsing with academic fascination. Instead of following the intended learning path, they're finding exploits, shortcuts that shouldn't exist but somehow do. Exploits? Quarth's crystalline form shimmed with concern. That sounds dangerous. Zalax's facial membranes arranged themselves into what he'd learned was a human expression of irony. That's what makes it brilliant. They're not breaking the rules, they're understanding them better than we do. In the zero-gravity combat chamber, Nova Chen floated through a complex series of maneuvers that had her alien instructors checking their sensors for malfunctions. Her movements shouldn't have been possible given the chamber's randomized gravity fields, yet she flowed through them like water. It's just like controlling camera angles in space sims, she explained later to a baffled review board. You don't fight the physics, you work with them. Meanwhile, in the psychic resistance training facility, Mason Drake had discovered something that threatened to upend thousands of years of established theory. The standard approach to defending against psychic attacks involved building complex mental barriers, a process that typically took years to master. Mason, however, treated it like managing enemy AI in strategy games. You're not supposed to block the attacks, he explained to an increasingly agitated Professor Ilara, the Academy's head of psychic studies. You need to redirect them, like turning enemy aggro against other mobs. Aggro? Mobs? Ilara's telepathic inquiry carried notes of confusion and frustration. These terms are not in our xenolinguistic database. Gaming terminology, Rex chimed in, not looking up from his modified neural interface. Basic MMO mechanics. The principle is simple, why waste energy fighting something when you can make it work for you? The discovery led to a complete overhaul of the Academy's psychic defense protocols. Within weeks, even non-human students were showing marked improvements using the new, aggro management, techniques. But not everyone was pleased with these developments. High Commander Vextrau, the Academy's combat instructor and a member of the warrior caste of the Arcturus Collective, watched the humans' progress with growing concern. His species had evolved from apex predators, and their combat doctrine had dominated galactic military theory for millennia. This is unacceptable, he declared during an emergency faculty meeting. They're turning our sacred combat arts into games. Professor Zalax offered, his spots flickering with barely concealed amusement. Precisely. Vextrau's bioluminescent patterns flashed warning colors. Combat is not a game. War is not entertainment. These humans treat our most serious disciplines as if they were mere puzzles to be solved. And yet, Dr. Quarth interjected, their approach is producing results that surpass our traditional methods by several orders of magnitude. The data was undeniable. In just 2 months, the 3 human cadets had achieved mastery levels that took other species years to reach. More importantly, their techniques were reproducible. Other students who adopted their methods showed similar improvements. There's something else, Zalax added, bringing up a new set of readings. We've detected unusual patterns in the quantum substrate of their training simulations. It appears their gaming approach is actually tapping into fundamental aspects of reality we never considered. The implications were staggering. What if the humans' seemingly primitive entertainment systems had accidentally stumbled upon universal principles that the galaxy's finest minds had overlooked? Back in the training grounds, Nova, Mason, and Rex faced their biggest challenge yet. The Academy's infamous, impossible scenario, a combined test of every skill taught in the curriculum, designed to be unbeatable. No student had ever passed it. That was the point. Ready? Nova asked, her neural interface synchronized with her teammates. Mason nodded, his silver-streaked hair gleaming under the simulation chamber's lights. Just like Raid Night. Except this time, Rex grinned, bringing up multiple holographic interfaces. We're speedrunning it. The simulation began, and something unprecedented happened. Instead of treating each challenge as a separate obstacle, the humans approached it like an integrated game system. They found synergies between different disciplines that no one had ever considered. Nova's combat movements created quantum fluctuations that Mason's psychic abilities could amplify. Rex's strategic calculations took advantage of these fluctuations, turning them into weapons. They weren't just solving the scenario, they were rewriting its fundamental rules. Professor Zaxari watched in amazement as the impossible became possible. His spots pulsed with a revelation: the humans weren't just learning the Academy's lessons, they were teaching the galaxy a new way of thinking. But as the simulation reached its climax, alarms began blaring throughout the Academy. Real ones. Emergency alert, the AI system announced. Multiple quantum signatures detected. Configuration matches Zaxari battle fleet. The humans exchanged glances. This wasn't part of any simulation. Professor, Nova called out, her voice carrying the same determination it had during the Christmas invasion, I think it's time to show the galaxy what we've really learned. As the alert klaxons wailed and the Academy's defensive shields hummed to life, Professor Zaxari realized that everything up to this point, the training, the discoveries, the broken records, had just been the tutorial. The real game was about to begin. When games become reality. The Zaxari battle fleet materialized in Centaur Prime's orbit like a tear in reality, 15 dreadnoughts, each capable of destroying a small moon. As the Academy's warning systems blared, Rex Thompson studied the holographic tactical display with an expression that Professor Zaxari had learned to both fear and respect. They're using the same formation as the Christmas attack, Rex said, his fingers dancing across multiple interfaces. Classic pincer movement, just like in Stellar Command 3, Nova finished, already adjusting her combat suit's neural links. The Siege of New Terra mission. Mason's silver-streaked hair seemed to catch fire under the emergency lights. They really don't learn new tricks, do they? Professor Zaxari's spots pulsed with anxiety. This is not a game, cadets. The Zaxari. With respect, Professor, Nova interrupted, her eyes never leaving the tactical display, that's exactly what this is. The Zaxari treat warfare like a perfectly solved equation. But games? She smiled that dangerous smile he remembered from the invasion footage. Games are about changing the rules. High Commander Vextral burst into the command center, his bioluminescent patterns flashing battle colors. All cadets to shelter stations. This is not a drill. Belay that order, came a crystalline harmonic voice. The command center fell silent as High Counselor Vectra's holographic form materialized. Professor Zaxari, your experiment has brought us to this moment. What do your humans suggest? Before Zaxari could respond, Rex stepped forward, still manipulating multiple holographic interfaces. The Zaxari aren't here to destroy the Academy, he said, his usual grin replaced by intense concentration. They're here to steal it. Explain, Vectra demanded. Look at their quantum signatures, Rex continued, highlighting patterns in the data stream. They're running active scanning protocols. They're not interested in the Academy's defenses, they want our training data. Mason nodded, his psychic sensitivities picking up additional layers of information. They must have analyzed their defeat on Earth. They're not just after revenge, they want to understand how we beat them. Nova had already started reprogramming her combat interfaces. Which means we have exactly what they don't, the element of surprise. Professor Zaxari watched in amazement as his 3 human students seamlessly fell into roles that seemed to have been rehearsed, despite the unprecedented nature of the situation. It's called a raid group, Rex explained, noting his confusion. Standard MMO structure. Nova's our tank, Mason's DPS and crowd control, and I'm support and strategy. In standard basic, please, Vextral growled. He means they have a plan, Zaxari translated, his spots pulsing with growing excitement. Don't they always? In the quantum computing core, Rex's fingers flew across holographic keyboards while he explained his strategy. The Zaxari use deterministic combat algorithms. They literally can't comprehend randomness, it's not in their programming. Which is why they lost on Earth, Nova added, helping him reconfigure the Academy's defense systems. Human gameplay is inherently unpredictable. Mason, meanwhile, had patched into the Academy's psychic network. They're trying to brute force our security protocols. Classic boss battle strategy, hit the strongest defenses first. So we give them what they expect, Rex grinned, looking more like his old self. While we exploit the mechanics they don't even know exist. Professor Zaxari watched as they transformed the Academy's traditional defense grid into something entirely new. Nova's combat expertise merged with Rex's strategic insights and Mason's psychic abilities to create a defense system that worked like a game. We're treating each defense layer like a raid boss, Rex explained as they worked. The Zaxari will have to deal with mechanics they've never seen before. And the best part? Nova added, finalizing her modifications to the combat systems. They can't just power through it. They have to learn the fight. Which they won't, Mason concluded, his silver-streaked hair now glowing with psychic energy. Because they don't know how to play. The first Zaxari wave hit the Academy's outer shields exactly as Rex predicted. Their quantum-tipped weapons, designed to pierce any known defense, splashed harmlessly against barriers that shouldn't have existed. Shield mechanics, Phase 1, Rex announced from his command station. Just like we practiced. Nova's fingers danced across her interface, treating the Academy's defensive systems like a complex game controller. The shields didn't just block the Zaxari attacks, they reflected them in patterns that seemed random but were actually carefully choreographed. They're adapting, Mason warned, his psychic senses detecting changes in the enemy fleet's quantum signatures. Starting to recognize the pattern. Good, Nova smiled. Time for Phase 2. The Academy's defensive systems suddenly shifted, transforming from a static barrier into what appeared to be a chaotic light show. But to anyone familiar with video games, the pattern was obvious. Are those? Professor Zaxari's spots flickered in disbelief. Are those bullet hell patterns? Toho Project, Rex confirmed, not looking up from his screens. Greatest dodging game ever made. Let's see how the Zaxari handle this. The alien fleet's perfect formation began to break as their ships tried to navigate the seemingly random barrage. Their deterministic combat algorithms couldn't process the constantly changing patterns. They're splitting up, Mason reported. Just like we wanted. Nova's smile turned predatory. Time for the DPS phase. The Academy's weapons, reprogrammed to function like video game power-ups, unleashed attacks that changed properties mid-flight. Quantum torpedoes split into patterns copied from classic shoot-'em-ups. Defense turrets fired in rhythms based on rhythm game mechanics. The Zaxari fleet, unable to predict or counter these unorthodox tactics, began to fall into disarray. Final phase, Rex announced, initiating a sequence that looked suspiciously like a combo system from a fighting game. Mason, now. Mason channeled his psychic energy through the Academy's systems, turning the quantum fluctuations created by the battle into weapons. The technique, inspired by managing party buffs in RPGs, amplified the Academy's defenses beyond anything its designers had imagined possible. Impossible, High Commander Vex breathed, watching the Zaxari fleet retreat in disarray. They turned our entire defense system into a game, Professor Zaxari finished, his spots pulsing with pride. The most elaborate game ever played. But as the last Zaxari ships vanished into quantum space, Nova's expression turned serious. They'll be back, she said, already analyzing the battle data. And next time, they'll be ready for these strategies. Good thing we have more games to draw from, Rex grinned, bringing up what appeared to be his personal gaming library, thousands of titles spanning centuries of human game development. "Professor," Mason called out, his psychic senses still active, "I think it's time we showed them our raid progression strategy." Professor Zalax's spots flickered with curiosity. Raid progression? Nova's smile returned, but now it held a hint of something else, anticipation. "It means we've been holding back everything up until now. That was just the tutorial. The meta evolves." The Academy's quantum computing core hummed with activity as Rex Thompson studied the latest Zaxari battle data. 3 weeks had passed since their first victory, and something was bothering him. "They're learning," he muttered, his usual grin replaced by a thoughtful frown. "Not just adapting, actually learning." Nova looked up from her combat simulator, where she'd been developing new defense patterns. "Isn't that impossible? You said their algorithms were deterministic." "They were." Rex highlighted a series of quantum signatures. "Look at these pattern variations. They're implementing randomness subroutines. Crude ones, but still. They're trying to learn how to play the game," Mason finished, his silver-streaked hair now almost completely white from continued exposure to quantum energies. His psychic abilities had grown strong enough to sense the Zaxari fleet's movements even through quantum space. Professor Zalax's spots pulsed with concern as he studied the data. "Is this not what you expected?" "No," Rex replied, suddenly grinning again. "It's exactly what we were hoping for. They're finally starting to understand, but they're still thinking like NPCs trying to learn player strategies." "NPCs?" Zalax asked. "Non-player characters," Nova explained, already modifying her combat protocols. "They can only learn within their programmed parameters. But we're about to change the whole game." In the Academy's secure archives, High Counselor Vectra's crystalline form shimmered with concern as she reviewed Professor Zalax's latest report. "The Zaxari are not merely seeking revenge," she observed. "They are attempting to evolve." "Yes," Zalax agreed, his spots pulsing rapidly. "But that's not the most interesting part. Watch this." He played back footage from the human's latest training session. Nova Chen was running combat simulations that seemed to defy physics, her movements creating patterns in quantum space that shouldn't have been possible. Mason Drake's psychic abilities had evolved beyond anything in the Academy's records, allowing him to manipulate quantum fluctuations directly. And Rex Thompson had somehow turned the Academy's entire defense grid into what he called a procedurally generated combat engine. "They're not just beating the system," Zalax explained, his excitement evident in his bioluminescence. "They're transcending it. Every game they've ever played, every strategy they've ever learned, it's all coming together into something entirely new." "And the Zaxari?" Vectra asked. "They're trying to copy our students' methods without understanding the fundamental principle behind them." "Which is?" Zalax's spots formed patterns that approximated a human smile. "That the rules are meant to be broken." In their private training room, Nova, Mason, and Rex had gathered for what they called a strategy session, though it looked more like a gaming tournament to their alien observers. "The Zaxari are implementing randomness algorithms," Rex explained, bringing up multiple game interfaces. "But they're doing it wrong. They think randomness just means unpredictability." "But in games," Nova added, running through a complex series of combat maneuvers, "true randomness is about creating opportunities." Mason nodded, his psychic abilities picking up echoes of their previous battles. "They're trying to copy our surface strategies without understanding the meta." "The meta?" Professor Zalax had entered silently, his spots pulsing with curiosity. "The game beyond the game," Rex explained. "In competitive gaming, it's not just about the rules, it's about how players interpret and evolve those rules over time. And the Zaxari," Nova smiled, "are about to learn about meta shifts." The warning came 3 days later. Mason's enhanced psychic abilities detected the Zaxari fleet's quantum signatures long before the Academy's sensors could pick them up. "They've adapted their ships," he reported, his white hair glowing with psychic energy. New configurations, based on our defense patterns. How many? High Commander Vextral demanded. 30 dreadnoughts, Rex answered, his fingers flying across multiple interfaces. Plus support ships. They've been studying our replays. Nova was already in her combat station, neural links active. Good thing we weren't playing at full power before. Professor Zalax's spots flickered with alarm. What do you mean? Classic gaming strategy, Rex grinned. Never show all your cards in the first match. Let the enemy think they've figured out your patterns. Then show them what real gameplay looks like, Nova finished. The Zaxari fleet emerged from quantum space in a formation that perfectly countered their previous tactics. Their weapons had been modified to match the rhythm of the Academy's defense patterns, and their shields now incorporated randomness algorithms. They really did their homework, Rex observed, but his grin hadn't faded. Too bad they're studying for the wrong test. Nova's hands flew across her controls, implementing combat patterns that bore no resemblance to their previous strategies. Instead of the predictable bullet hell patterns, the Academy's defenses now moved like something out of a reality-bending puzzle game. Phase shift protocols active, she announced. Running quantum maze sequence. The space around the Academy seemed to fold in on itself, creating geometric patterns that shouldn't have been possible in normal space. The Zaxari fleet's carefully planned counter-strategies suddenly became useless as their ships found themselves navigating an ever-changing labyrinth of quantum energy. They're trying to adapt, Mason reported, his psychic senses tracking the enemy's confusion. But they're still thinking linearly. Time for the consciousness split. Do it, Rex confirmed, initiating what he called the multi-box protocol. Mason closed his eyes, his psychic abilities reaching out to merge with the Academy's systems. Drawing on principles from games where players controlled multiple characters simultaneously, he split his consciousness across multiple quantum states. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Zaxari ships found themselves facing attacks that existed in several quantum states simultaneously, each requiring different and often contradictory responses. Their algorithms can't process the paradox, Rex reported with satisfaction. They're trying to calculate optimal responses to everything at once. Time to show them our real ultimate ability, Nova said, initiating a sequence she had developed by combining principles from fighting games, rhythm games, and quantum physics simulations. The Academy's entire defense grid transformed, its energy patterns shifting into configurations that even Professor Zalax had never seen before. Every game the humans had ever played, every strategy they had ever learned, every pattern they had ever mastered, all of it came together in a display of combat prowess that redefined what was possible. What is this? Vextral demanded, his bioluminescent patterns flashing with a mixture of awe and confusion. This, Rex said, his grin wider than ever, is what happens when you let gamers rewrite the rules of reality. The Zaxari fleet's formation broke, their ships scattering as their combat algorithms crashed under the strain of processing impossible scenarios. But even as they retreated, Mason's psychic senses picked up something troubling. They're not running away, he warned. They're gathering data. Everything we're doing, they're learning from it. Nova nodded grimly. Good. Because we're not just teaching them how to fight. We're teaching them how to play, Rex finished. And the final round is going to change everything. Game over, new game plus. Professor Zalax stood in the Academy's observation dome, his spots pulsing with a complex mixture of emotions as he watched the largest Zaxari fleet ever assembled emerge from quantum space. 100 dreadnoughts, their hulls gleaming with new adaptive quantum armor, surrounded Centaur Prime in a perfect sphere of destruction. Beautiful, isn't it? Rex Thompson said, still grinning as he worked on multiple holographic interfaces. They finally learned proper raid positioning. Nova Chen nodded, making final adjustments to her combat systems. Formation's perfect. Almost like they've been practicing. They have been, Mason Drake confirmed, his now pure white hair glowing with psychic energy. I can sense their quantum signatures. They've been running simulations, actual simulations, not just combat algorithms. Professor Zaxari's spots flickered with sudden understanding. This was your plan all along, wasn't it? The three humans exchanged knowing looks before Nova answered. Remember what you told the council about our games, Professor? How they prepared us for real combat. We just returned the favor, Rex added, his grin taking on a new dimension. The Zaxari needed to learn how to play. High Counselor Vectra's crystalline form materialized in the command center, accompanied by the full Galactic Council. Report, Professor Zaxari. What are we facing? The end of the old game, Mason answered before Zaxari could speak. And the beginning of a new one. The council chamber erupted in confused discussions until Nova stepped forward. With respect, honored ones, everything we've done, every battle, every strategy, every seemingly impossible feat, has been leading to this moment. Rex brought up a complex display showing the quantum signatures of the Zaxari fleet. Look at their pattern variations. They're not just mimicking our techniques anymore. They're innovating. Impossible, High Commander Vextral declared. The Zaxari are machines. They operate on pure logic, perfect mathematics. They cannot create. That's where you're wrong, Mason said, his psychic abilities probing the enemy fleet. They're evolving. Every time we showed them a new way to bend reality, we weren't just defending ourselves, we were teaching them how to think differently. Like speedrunners sharing strategies, Rex explained, noting the council's confusion. In gaming, the best players don't just keep their techniques secret. They share them, build on them, create whole new ways to play. And that's what humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy really is, Nova added. Not our combat skills or our unpredictability. It's our ability to turn everything, even war, into a game that everyone can learn to play better. The Zaxari's first attack came not as a devastating barrage, but as a complex quantum probe that tested the Academy's defenses in ways that would have been impossible months ago. Their ships moved in patterns that combined their mathematical precision with distinctly human-inspired creativity. They're not trying to destroy us, Rex announced, analyzing the data. They're initiating a multiplayer session. Professor Zaxari's spots pulsed with disbelief. You mean? The true purpose of games isn't winning or losing, Nova explained, her hands dancing across her combat controls in perfect synchronization with the Zaxari movements. It's learning, improving, evolving, together. Mason's psychic abilities reached out, touching the quantum consciousness that guided the Zaxari fleet. They understand now. War isn't about destruction. It's about transformation. The space around the Academy transformed into something never before seen in the history of the galaxy. The Zaxari's perfect mathematical patterns merged with human creativity and unpredictability, creating a dance of quantum energies that rewrote the very rules of reality. What you're witnessing, Rex explained to the astonished council, is the first true collaboration between organic and machine consciousness. They're not fighting us anymore, they're playing with us. Nova smiled as she guided the Academy's defenses through maneuvers that matched and complemented the Zaxari's movements. Every game needs worthy opponents. But the best games create worthy partners. The display of power and precision continued to escalate, but now it wasn't about dominance or destruction. The Zaxari fleet and the Academy's defenses wove increasingly complex patterns in quantum space, each innovation building on the last, creating something entirely new. They're proposing an exchange, Mason announced, his psychic abilities translating the quantum signatures. They want to share their computational capabilities. In exchange for learning more about human creativity in game design, Rex finished, his grin wider than ever. They want to become better players. 1 year later, Professor Zaxari stood before the Galactic Council again, his spots pulsing with pride as he delivered his final report. The integration of Zaxari quantum computing with human gaming principles has revolutionized every field of study, he announced. Our understanding of reality itself has evolved beyond what we thought possible. The Academy had been transformed. Where once there were rigid training programs and impossible standards, now there were collaborative learning environments that combined the best of machine precision and human creativity. The Zaxari, once the galaxy's greatest threat, had become its most enthusiastic students of play. And the humans? Vectra asked, her crystalline form shimmering with what might have been amusement. Still breaking every rule we thought was unbreakable, Zalax replied, his spots forming what had become a very human smile. But now they're teaching others how to break them too. In the newly established quantum gaming division, Nova Chen led combat exercises that looked more like elaborate dance performances. Mason Drake's psychic teachings helped bridge the gap between organic and machine consciousness. And Rex Thompson continued to grin as he helped both humans and aliens discover new ways to play with reality itself. The galaxy was wrong about games, Zalax concluded. We thought they were just entertainment, a distraction from reality. But humans knew better. They understood that play is how all consciousness learns, grows, and evolves. And the Christmas invasion? Vectra asked. Was that part of their game as well? No, Nova answered, entering the chamber with Mason and Rex. That was just the tutorial. This, transforming an entire civilization through the power of play, this is the real game. And the best part? Rex added, his grin now somehow both older and younger at the same time. We're all still learning how to play. Mason nodded, his white hair glowing with possibilities yet to be explored. After all, every good game needs expansions. The humans' laughter echoed through the council chamber, joined by the harmonious resonance of crystalline beings and the quantum hum of Zaxari consciousness. In that moment, the galaxy itself seemed to pulse with the joy of play, the thrill of discovery, and the endless potential of games yet to be played. And somewhere, on a planet called Earth, a child picked up a gaming controller for the first time, unknowingly continuing the tradition that had transformed the universe itself. Game over.